What's good, Believing? It is so wonderful to see you today, to gather with you, whether at church online, watching on YouTube, listen to this podcast. I am so grateful that you are here with us on today. If you're new with us, welcome. You have dropped into the middle of an extended collection of sermons we are calling By Faith. This is actually, believe it or not, part 13, all right, if you're keeping count, of this collection of sermons where we have been walking through the stories of the heroes and the heroines of our faith. Men and women who lived their lives, who gave their lives for God, but it wasn't just by accident. There was intentionality because they moved by faith. At some point in their life, they arrived at an inflection point and decided, I'm going to follow him. I'm going to do what God wants. I'm going to pursue his purposes for my life first and foremost. But their example to us is more than just an example. It's actually a calling to us, for us as people of faith, to live our lives by faith. For our faith to not just be something that we have and we hold, that we think about, that warms us at night, so to speak, but that the movement of our lives would happen and take place by faith. The sad reality is, as we've been discovering throughout this series, this collection of sermons, is that many people who say they have faith don't do anything because of it. They talk faith, but they don't live faith. They have mental assents that they call faith, but never movements that take faith. There's no evidence, if you will, that demonstrates their lives have been altered, changed, affected, different now by faith. Which leads us to you. How much of what it is that you do requires faith to do? How much of what it is that you do every day of your life, every week of your life, with the way you operate from month to month, from your schedule to your budget to the way you treat people, to the people that you hold on to, the people that how much of what you do takes faith to do? See, a lot of what we call faith never takes a step. It never addresses the places in our hearts and lives that are squeamish because they're unsurrendered or stagnant because they're scared. See, if I were to really bow up on you, you know what I'm saying? Like if I were to really come at you and push you, the truth is the reason that you won't move by faith is because you're scared. There is probably an area of your life, if you've been joining us in this series, you feel like the plane will never land. It just keeps circling over that thing. Because that thing, that place, that area that is unsurrendered, that's the reason you're squeamish. That space, that place, it's stagnant there. And the reason it's stagnant is because you're scared. Scared to trust God with that. Scared to do what he says there. That's why you won't share, or serve, or help, or give, or find community, or trust God with that. See, to consistently, hear me today, to consistently move by faith, you have to be courageous managing this thing that is fear. Because you can't hold on to fear and hold on to faith at the same time. You can't have faith and move by faith and also give in to the leading and guiding of your fear. Because faith will call you to some crazy and some scary and some confusing and some challenging and some trying places. How do I know this? Well, because I've read Hebrews 11. And yes, these are the heroes and the heroines of our faith. It's a chapter known as the Hall of Fame of faith. Great women, great men of God who live their lives by faith. It tells us some things about them. And today I want to begin by laying groundwork with really what is the remainder of the chapter in Hebrews chapter 11. To help you to see that their faith, their lives were marked because of the moves they made by faith. Here's the way the testimony rings out of these heroes and heroines of our faith. Starting in verse 32 of Hebrews chapter 11, the scriptures are recorded this way. It says, "And what more can I say? Remember, the writer has talked everywhere from Abel and Enoch and Noah and Abraham to Sarah to Isaac to Jacob to the people of Israel to Joseph to Moses, his parents, and Moses himself, to Israel as they would leave, to the prostitute Rahab. They covered them all. He says, and what more can I say? Time is too short for me to tell you about Gideon and Barak, and Samson and Jephthah and David, Samuel, and all the prophets, who by faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched the raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, gained strength after being weak, became mighty in battle, and put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead. They were raised to life again. Some men were tortured, not accepting release, so that they might gain a better resurrection. Others experienced mockings and scourgings, as well as bonds and imprisonment. They were stoned. They were sawed in two. They died by the sword. They wandered around in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, afflicted, and mistreated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and on mountains, hiding in caves and holes in the ground. All of these were approved through their faith. If you think that moving by faith, as often is portrayed in the year 2025, looks anything like the heroes and the heroines of our faith, you're mistreated. Because if you think moving by faith is supposed to bring you an easy life, you don't know faith. They didn't have faith for a new car. They had faith for God to use their life. They didn't have faith to have a better job. They had faith that the work that they did for God, the work that God had them do, regardless of what it was, regardless of whether people thought they were qualified or capable of it, that he would be with them and be for them and move them. So they took steps by faith. Which leads us to our next hero. See, the writer in Hebrews 11 makes a presumption about his readers that would have been true of his initial audience. He presumes that these names that are listed in rapid fire, they know the stories, they know the actions, they know the life lived by faith. When he talks of Barak and Samson and Jephthah and David, Samuel and prophet, that there's this understanding of what they did. And so he says, I ain't even got time to touch on these, but baby, I got time. In fact, I think it's important for you and for I to lean into all of their stories. And so as we started with Abel and continued up to Rahab on last week, and we'll continue forward, every single hero and heroine mentioned, I want you to see what faith looked like to them and for them. Not just so you can have recollection as a story, but so that you can have an example to move by faith. So that the Spirit of God can convict and call and push forward you living, walking, moving, breathing by faith, which leads us to our next hero, Gideon. Now let me catch you up quickly on the story of Israel. Because to a certain extent, the writer in Hebrews 11 starts with short time after creation and just sort of builds key figure by key figure. Builds with significant faith mover by significant faith mover. Moses, the great emancipator, the great leader, was called by God to return to Egypt and tell the Pharaoh to let his people go. And Moses did. And Moses led Israel out of more than 400 years of captivity, slavery in Egypt, to the promised land, not on a direct route, but on a 40-year detour. Moses led the people to the bank of the Jordan River, and God said, your time, your assignment is done. And there Moses died. But then Joshua assumed the leadership position. Joshua was raised up. Joshua was promised by God, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And Joshua led the nation of Israel, the people of Israel, the house of Israel, through the Jordan River and was the leader as they conquered and conquested this land that God had given to him. He was the leader who ultimately would divide and parcel up this promised land after they had secured all the territory that God had promised to them and said, this tribe will be over there and this tribe will be down here and you guys can be over there, and why don't you take this spot over here? He's the one that leads all this. But ultimately, as we all do, Joshua dies as well. And no one is able to step into the shoes that Moses and Joshua had filled. And what the scripture actually tells us about people is that the people then forgot God, and they forgot what he had done. It didn't take long. The next generation after Joshua had forgotten how God brought deliverance to people enslaved in Egypt. The generation after Joshua forgot how God had provided for them for 40 years in the wilderness, forgot how God had given them strength to win battles that they should not have won, forgot how God had fought for them and provided for them, how the very land that they were in, God had given them. They forgot all that. They weren't close to God. They wanted to do their own thing, and God let them. He gave them over to their own heart's desires. Through this time, God doesn't have the attention of all of Israel. They're doing their own thing. But from time to time, season to season, at certain points and at certain places, God would raise up men and women known as the judges, who, while people were out doing what they saw was right in their own eyes, God would raise up a man, he would raise up a woman who would lead people for a moment, and God would bring prosperity and he would bring peace to the land, not because they were Israel, but because there was a man, because there was a woman who was submitted to him. Gideon was one of those judges. In fact, the story of Gideon begins in Judges chapter 6, and the people in Gideon's camp, the people around, they are being ransacked and bothered by a group of people known as the Midianites. And they had all of their food and all of their valuables plundered to the extent that they were so destitute that the scripture says they now cried out to God. It's funny how you can be on top of the world and want nothing to do with God, but as soon as you hit the bottom of the barrel, you say, God, do you see me? And he's like, I saw you all along. How do you think you were so blessed? But in their destitute nature, they cry out to God, and God does not send them Gideon, the great judge, to lead them and fight for them and bring about their freedom first. He sends a prophet who reminds them that they forsake God. A prophet who tells them how they have wandered from his instruction, how they've wandered from seeking his will and his ways first and foremost. And after this prophet comes and reminds them of their unwillingness to follow God wholeheartedly, God says, all right, but I'm not going to leave you there. Because that's not how God left them. It's not how God leaves people. It's not how God leaves you and me even today. He doesn't just correct us. He doesn't just slap us across the face and say, you forgot me. Now you better figure this out. But he came to their rescue through the man, Gideon. And here's the way Judges 6 puts it, how it begins to tell the story of this hero of our faith. And maybe the reality of where God finds this great hero will surprise you, but also speak to you. It says this in verse 11 of chapter 6 of the book of Judges, that the angel of the Lord came and sat beneath the great tree at Ophrah, which belonged to Joash of the clan of Abiezer. Gideon, son of Joash, was threshing wheat at the bottom of a winepress to hide the grain from the Midianites. The angel of the Lord appeared to him and said, mighty warrior, the Lord is with you. Sir, Gideon replied, if the Lord is with us, why has all this happened to us? And where are all the miracles that our ancestors told us about? Didn't they say the Lord brought us out of Egypt? But now the Lord has abandoned us and handed us over to the Midianites. Then the Lord turned to him and said, go in the strength you have and rescue Israel from the Midianites. I am sending you. But Lord, Gideon replied, how can I rescue Israel? My clan is the weakest in the whole tribe of Manasseh, and I am the least in my entire family. The Lord said to him, I will be with you. You will destroy the Midianites as if you were fighting against one man. This is a stark contrast to what we would think of as a hero of the faith. I mean, Hebrews 11 puts him in the list. Hebrews 11 says, these are the women, these are the men who followed God by faith. But that's not how Gideon started. He started full of doubt and full of fear. He started overwhelmed and concerned about his situation, concerned about the opposition, concerned about his inabilities and everything else going on in his life. Yet this man becomes one of the greatest heroes of the faith known, specifically for his bravery. The story of Gideon's life becomes a story of bravery. The testimony of Gideon's life becomes this testimony of a man who fought with far fewer people than he had access to because God told him to, who brought about great victory, who ran not just the Midianites off, but ran them into decimation forever. How? From there. From when God meets him and God finds him in Judges chapter 6 and he's insecure and he's fearful, how he paid attention. You need to understand the power of Gideon paying attention. Because we all, I don't care what the doctor said about you, put our attention on something. They may have told you had an attention deficit disorder, but can I tell you, you still have your attention on something. You may be the type of person who is very focused, or they call you very unfocused. You have your attention on something. And Gideon, when God meets him, has his attention on a whole lot of things, but they're very different than the thing he needs his attention on. And what's remarkable about Gideon is not the place that God found him when he started. He overcame that because he got his attention on the thing God said mattered most. Hear me today. We give too much attention to who we think we are and not enough attention to who God says we are. Can I tell you, for many of us, this is our issue. We give way too much attention to who we think we are. Way too much attention to how we see ourselves and not enough attention to who God says we are. Gideon's example to us, Gideon's proof of moving by faith is that he found himself obsessed with all the things that everybody else would give their attention to. But over time, by faith, he moved and began to set his attention not on what he thought about himself, not on what he heard he was supposed to be focused on, but he set his attention on who God says he was. By faith. That's the story of Gideon. A movement by faith. And then, though he started fearful in a wine press, he hiding out from the bad guys, he finds himself in the Hall of Fame of faith. As one of the greatest leaders, one of the greatest fighters, one of the greatest men who follow God, who believe God in history. Because he didn't allow the limits that typically would hold him back to hold him back. Today I want to look at this Genesis story with Gideon and look at a few things that limit us from moving bravely by faith. Because I believe some of the responses from Gideon, some of the apprehensions that he faced and ultimately overcame are the same apprehensions that you have today. Oh, maybe God's not calling you to defeat another army, but maybe he's calling you to stand up in a neighborhood. Maybe he's calling you to start making a difference. Maybe he's calling you to start trusting him with some area of your life that you've been unwilling and reluctant to. And you've got all the excuses, you've got all the reasons, because you've got all of your attention on the wrong thing. We give too much attention to who we think we are and not enough attention to who God says we are. So what limits us from moving bravely by faith? Would you write a few things down today, whether you're taking notes just on your own or you're on our website taking notes there? Write this down today. What limits us from moving bravely by faith? Fear about what is happening. Fear about what is happening. We live in a world that is riddled by fear. I think fear, people wouldn't say it, but fear is the most common emotion among people today. Parents are scared for their kids. Shoot, kids are scared for their parents. Locally, people are worried. What does this mean? And what are they doing? And what's happening over here? And what's going on with this issue? Nationally, we're worried about this and worried about that and worried about what's going on and worried is this good and worried is this bad and worried about this person. Internationally, these crises seem to pop up almost on the hour. And we try to manage our thoughts and craft our perspectives and our responses to all these things. And it leads us to a place where we're very fearful about what's going on in the world. I'm scared of what's going on in the world, some people will say. We're worried. Will I get married? Do I want to get married? Will I buy a house? Should I buy a house? Will I be able to get a good job? Do I even want to work for somebody, or do I want to work for myself? Do I want to can I make these freelancing things add up and go? Will I make it through this season of my life? See, it's these questions that fill us with fear when we look out at what's happening in our world, what's happening in your world, in this season of your life. And many people have allowed their present fears to limit their faith. But not Gideon, ultimately. Now, I say ultimately because when the angel of the Lord meets him, he is allowing fear to preoccupy his life. He is threshing wheat at the bottom of a wine press, which may not mean much to you because you may not have done much threshing of wheat or pressing of wine. But can I tell you, he's there because he's scared. Threshing wheat was an activity very common in that day in that part of the world. And it is when you beat wheat in order to separate the parts of the wheat that are unedible from the parts that are edible. And essentially you need flat, wide open spaces. It's known as a threshing floor to give you plenty of room to operate this process and to put the parts of the wheat that can be used for fire or used for other purposes over here, and the parts of the wheat that can be used for grain and used for bread and used for whatever over here. And to separate these, you need room so you can build a stack here, build a stack there. That is the ideal environment known as a threshing floor. But yet we find Gideon in a different spot. He is in a wine press. He is in a hole in the ground that has a purpose. That purpose is to stomp on grapes and allow that juice that comes out to sit and ultimately ferment and be turned into wine. It has a purpose, just not the purpose he's there. He's there because this hole in the ground allows him to do his work and not be seen by the enemy. He's there because he's afraid of what's going on in the world. He's in this small, hidden place, not suited for the threshing of wheat. But he's doing it there anyway because he's afraid. He is having this conversation with God about purpose in a place that symbolizes his fear. I see you there, mighty warrior. Gideon's probably like, do you know what I'm doing and where? Because there ain't nothing mighty about me. But yet it's there in his fear that God begins to speak to him. It's there in his trepidation that God begins to call him. What are you so afraid of right now that it is your excuse for not following God by faith? Where are you hiding? Because you may not tell people you're afraid, but I bet you're afraid. I bet there is something that brings you fear, whether it's an inability to provide, whether it's a concerns about what's going on in our city or going on in our country, whether you're concerned about something happening on the other side of the world, you're worried about your kids, you're worried about there is something that worries you, and I bet you have found yourself in a place doing an activity that you're supposed to be doing, but you're only doing it there because you're scared. What do you tell God is your reason for not doing what he's asked you to do? Because God comes to each of us who have faith in him, and says, I want to use your life, and I have purposes for you. He knocks on the door of your heart and says, mighty warrior, I got a battle for you to fight. Woman of God, I got some work for you to do. But we respond by retreating to our hiding place, looking busy, saying, God, I ain't got time for that. Or we tell God, God, I'm still hurting from the last time I trusted you like that. God, I can't afford this. God, I'm too ashamed to step back in, to help out, to lead, to step up. I'm too ashamed because of how I treat. I'm too ashamed because of what if they... God, I'm too weak, too tired, too broken, too hurt. God, I'm too frustrated. It's fear. And some of you don't realize that the reason you're not moving bravely by faith is because you're afraid of what is happening. And so you have found comfort in doing something in a place that wasn't designed for that thing to happen. Friend, Gideon shows us something so important that you got to get on today. That you can move by faith even when you're afraid. Even when you're afraid, you can move by faith. This is ultimately Gideon's story. He's afraid, but he moves by faith. He's afraid through this whole conversation, but then he begins to start trusting God. And God begins to talk to him, and he kind of has to double check and triple check with God. Maybe you've heard the story of Gideon and the fleece. Gideon tells the angel of the Lord in another time, well, I need to make sure that you're really with me, so I'm going to put this fleece out on the ground, and when the dew comes, I want it to hit everywhere but the fleece. And God says, say less, I got you. And he proves his faithfulness. And Gideon said, that was a pretty good one, God, but just to make me feel a little more confident, a little more assured, can you drop the Missy Elliott on that and back up, flip it, and reverse it and make the fleece wet and everything else dry? And God says, all right, one time for Missy. And he does that too. He continues to meet Gideon at the point of his fear. When Gideon goes and gets men to fight the battle, he gets all he can, he gets this massive group of people. God says, that's too many people. I don't need all that. And Gideon, even though he's afraid, by faith, he starts sending men home by the thousands till there's just a few hundred left. And God says, yeah, that's what I need. Gideon was a mighty warrior. Many of his first steps in following God by faith, he did afraid. Crawled up out of the wine press, afraid. Asked God to wet the fleece and then not wet the fleece, afraid. Sent the men home, fought the battle by faith, but afraid. The thing is, he kept moving by faith. What if that became your story? Afraid, but moved by faith. I was afraid of how this whole thing would work out, but I moved by faith. I was afraid about what would happen if I really forgave them, but I moved by faith. I was afraid of what would happen if I trusted God with that, but I moved by faith. I was afraid of what would happen if I really started serving, if I really started praying, if I really started committing. I was afraid. But I did it anyway, by faith. See, fear about what is happening will limit you from moving bravely by faith. But even in your fear, move by faith. There's another thing Gideon shows us that keeps us from moving bravely by faith. Write it down. It is our doubts about what God does. It's not just our fear about what is happening, but also our doubts about what it is that God actually does. Now, I don't know if you saw this in the text, but I bet it's been a long time since you heard the Bible sound more like you than Gideon's initial reply to the angel of the Lord when the angel of the Lord meets him at the winepress threshing wheat and says, mighty man of valor, I see you down there. Because Gideon replies by saying, sir, if God is with me, then why is all this bad stuff happening to me and my people? If God is for me, why isn't good coming my way? Why isn't blessing? Why are people talking? I have heard stories about how God delivered his people. I have heard stories about how God brought it. I have heard about the miracles. I have heard about the signs. I have heard about the wonders of God. I just don't see them in my life. See, Gideon has some real doubts about the God he's heard about being the God that will now show up for him. I wonder how many of us, this is our hesitation in moving by faith. Because we hear some stuff about God. Maybe we come to a sermon, we hear a sermon and hear the stories of God of all. We hear stories about God moving in other people's lives. And we look around our life and we don't see a whole lot of it. We look around our experiences and we don't see his hand moving. We don't see miracles. We don't see this, and we wonder if it's true for us. Sometimes we take the temperature of our world and it's so dismal. So we doubt that God will do what we've been told God does. You know, I have a lot of people ask me, does God still? And really, a lot of their questions is, does he still move miraculously? They'll say it a lot of different ways. But their basic statement is, I've read stories in the Bible or heard stories about some other place in the world at some other time. But does God still do that stuff here and now today? And really what they're saying, even if it comes from a good place, is they say, I doubt what God does. In the last about 6 months or so, I've had 4 different friends of mine who are Middle Eastern Muslims tell me similar stories. And the stories are about having visions. And all of these visions, they have a vision, like they can see Jesus or they see Mary. Every one of them. And they're these powerful, they can recount and recite these visions that they have, which is strange for me because I don't even dream. Like my wife sometimes will be like, I had this dream, and she'll be telling me all this stuff, and she'll be like, what did you dream about? And I'm like, I dreamed that I had to use the restroom, but then I woke up and I really did have to use the restroom. That's how my dreams be going. And I understand some people be havens, but these friends of mine, these Middle Eastern, they will tell me about these very vivid, very real dreams that they are having. And it's like they see Jesus and they're like, I don't know what to do with this. And I was talking to some friends of mine a few months ago who are really experts when it concerns the Muslim community and concerning like even the work of God in Muslim nations. They have served as missionaries for I think about 15 years in a Muslim country and helping to say, and they all told me when I was telling them about these visions that some of my friends were having, they said God is moving and God is working. Do not discredit this. We see it over and over and over again, that God begins reaching and God begins knocking and he's standing at the door and it's through these visions that he begins to speak to and begin to change Muslim communities, to see his love, to see his grace, to see his power for them. It's supernatural. You can't make a vision happen for somebody. God shows up and does it. One day this week, I got a call here at the church. It's from a gentleman who was asking about the particulars of our grocery distribution, the signups and stuff like that. He was talking to me for a while and telling me about his situation that, he's handicapped and can't get around very well, has a support animal, and was trying to figure out all this different types of stuff, and I'm answering his questions, and we get to the end of it, and he starts to tell me, he said, Michael, I am not a person of faith, but he said, man, it's people like you, your church, who are out here in the heat and in the cold, and when it's easy and when it's hard, and when it feels like things are good in our country and things aren't good in our country, things are good in our city and are not good in our city, that you're out here serving and you're out here being a blessing. That for me, it's what makes me start to think that maybe there is a God, and maybe he does see me, and maybe he does care for me, because I don't know how I would be living right now if it wasn't for people like you guys and others around the city who are caring and going beyond their walls and going beyond their ability to serve and care. You're a miracle in my life. The thing is that a lot of times when we serve groceries, it don't feel very miraculous. It feels like work. I think the problem is sometimes we don't see what God is doing because it doesn't look like we wanted God working to look. There are people who the miracle of God to them comes through you and it comes through me. There are people that the miracle that God is doing in their life, he don't need nobody. He don't need an interpreter. He don't need somebody to show up. He is meeting them. And whatever it looks like, it's still miraculous. Because the problem isn't their hunger. Their problem isn't their religion. Their problem is they are separated from him. And he will do anything. He has done everything he can to make it possible for all people to find life and hope and salvation in him. See, God is not intimidated by any problem. He's not intimidated by a religion that's growing faster in the United States than Christianity is. He's not intimidated by someone who lives in a city with churches on every corner. Whether they're open or not is another discussion, but churches on every corner, but yet still has doubts, still has trepidation, still has fears about his existence. God is not intimidated by any problem. He's not intimidated by the Midianites coming in, bopping you on the head, taking all your food, taking all your toys, and going back and laughing at you along the way, saying, we'll be back next week, same time, and we're going to do the same thing. He ain't worried about any of it, Gideon. But what if God is inviting you and inviting me to be part of the solution? See, God knew how off track Israel was, and he wanted to use Gideon differently. See, God had been raising up judges. He had raised up Deborah, and he had raised up Ehud, and he had raised up Shamgar and others to be judges. And God wanted to use Gideon, and he wanted to bring about deliverance, but he wanted to do it through him. He could have wiped out the Midianites because he thought it. But he wanted to use Gideon there because there were a lot of people just like Gideon who had doubts about what God does. And God wanted to show them, remind them that he was for them. He was moving on their behalf. See, maybe God understands your doubts today. And maybe you're over here praying for a vision. And God's saying, I want you to be a blessing so someone else can see. God understands your doubts. But what I believe is he wants to use you and he wants to use me to bring about what he desires in the earth. But it's going to take us being people who move by faith in spite of our doubts. Who move by faith and don't allow this to block us. Write it down. Are questions about what you have. Some of us, the reason we don't move by faith is because, like Gideon, we have questions about what it is we have. You know, there are a lot of people who say they do for God if they had something. But the truth is you won't, because you won't use what you got right now. People all the time like to tell me, man, if I won the lottery, I'd give so much money to the church, to which I'm nice, so I don't respond. But sometimes I want to say, you know, if you don't give to God now with your little part-time job or your little salary that you prayed for and just said, God has brought so much financial peace and strength to our family, but you won't even give now, baby, when you win the lottery, you ain't going to give nothing to God because you don't do it now. Or they say, oh, you know, man, if I didn't have to work, man, I would spend so much time up at the church. I would just help so much. No, you wouldn't. Because you can't even be consistent and faithful in serving like 1 hour a week right now. So don't think that more time is going to somehow have you be different than you were. It's just not true. If you won't use what you got now, hear me, you won't use what you'll have later. If you won't use what God has placed in your hands right now, if you won't use what God has entrusted to you, what he's given to you right now, when he gives you more later, you won't use that either. I need you to say something to yourself right now. Repeat after me wherever you are. Say, I have enough. Come on, say it again. Say, I have enough. This will blow your mind from Gideon's story, but you need to understand that you have enough to do everything God is asking you to do right now. God told Gideon, at the bottom of a wine press, threshing wheat, to go in the strength that you have, which gotta feel like not very much. Like if I'm Gideon and the angel of the Lord is telling me, go in the strength you have, I'd be like, you do know where I am. And the fact that I'm like, strength isn't exactly something I have in excess. In fact, some would question whether or not I have any at all. I'm here hiding because I'm scared. Strength isn't what I have in abundant supply. But it didn't matter what Gideon thought he had or didn't have. God knew he had enough to take his next step and do the thing God was asking him to do. You better hear me right now and hear me loud and clear. God isn't worried about your reservations because God knows what he's already put in you. God isn't worried about all of your fears and all of your trepidations because when he comes knocking on your door, when he asks you to serve, he asks you to pray, he wants you to step up, he wants you to lead a group, he wants you to make a difference, he wants you to help on that team, he wants you to start giving, he wants you to start tithing, he wants you to start trusting him, he wants you to bring. He does it not because there's something more you need, but because he knows you've already got all you need to do that thing right now. All you have is all you need to do everything God has for you right now. So don't tell me you ain't got enough. You've got all you need now. Maybe in a month or a year or a decade, you're going to need some different skills. Or you're going to need some different abilities, or you're going to need some different resources, or you're going to need some different relationships in your life to accomplish that purpose. But that is later. Right now, you've got all you need to do all he's asked you to do. So do that in the strength you've got right now. You don't need a promotion. You don't need new friends. You don't need them to apologize. What you need to do is to do what God has asked you to do and forgive and serve and bless and be generous and operate like he's already, because all you have is all you need to do what God has asked you to do right now. But there's one final obstacle, one final pushback, one final reservation keeps us from following God bravely by faith. And quite honestly, it's the greatest thing that Gideon overcomes, that he demonstrates his faith in and through. And it's a perception about what we are. It is impossible to move bravely by faith for some of us because of the perception about what it is we are. See, the thing that limits you is not what other people say about you, but what you say about you. The scripture says, as a man thinks, so is he. As you think, so you are. I'm not giving you some psychological insight. This is biblical truth. Your hesitancy to trust God and move by faith, is it because your mama never said something, your cousin did say something, your friend, your boss, a preacher, whoever said something about you? The reason there's a hesitancy in you to trust God and move by faith isn't because of what they said. It's because you believe them. The problem is not the noise around you. The problem is not what they're trying to ascribe on you. The problem is when they said it to you, you believed it. So I had this guy last week tried to cut me down. He tried to, quite honestly, speak death over me. We believe our facility here on Summer Avenue is a tool to use for the glory of God and the good of our neighborhood. So we very openly, very consistently, with a lot of planning and strategy and effort to it, we make our building available for organizations, for people, for whatever, to be able to rent and use. We have Christian things and non-Christian things, just good even what. We use our building a lot. And so it is regular that we'll be reached out to by individuals, organizations trying to use the space. And this gentleman had reached out about using the space for some event he wanted to throw, and it was going to happen very, very soon. So he said, and he needed a massive amount of time. And it was one of those things where he wanted a massive amount of time for no money, but wanted it to be the most amazing thing in the world. And it's just like, it wasn't going to work. We have things going on all the time. We have ministry happening. We have prayer and Bible study and services and generosity and outreaches and classes, all this stuff going on. And it was like, man, I don't know that we can do all this. We can do just a little bit of time. And he didn't really like that, but it was like, okay. And the next thing I know, he just shows up at our building in the middle of a bunch of events. Like, we had just gotten done with a home buying class. We were setting things up for a memorial service, a funeral, if you will, that was about to take place. And people are already coming in for the funeral and trying to set things up. And this man just rolls up in and just starts looking around like he owns the place. And I never met him in person. And I walk up to him and he tries to introduce himself. And I said, I know who you are. I said, I'm going to need you to slide up out of here pretty quick, though. And he said, oh, we won't be here long. And I said, I know you won't be here long. He didn't really like this from me. And he was asking me a couple questions and asking me some other stuff. And I said, sir, I said, we are trying to host a family who has lost a loved one. I said, their funeral is going to start here in literally about 20 or 30 minutes. We are trying to get people arranged this. I can't handle you right now. Email me whatever it is you've got questions about. We'll get back to you, and if we can make it work, we'll work, and if we can't, we can't. But that's going to be what I need you to do. So he stayed for another minute or so, and then he left. And he emailed me. But when he emailed me, he wasn't trying to email me his questions or concerns or commendations. He tried to come at me. Talk about how terrible I was to him, which is whatever. People say whatever they want. I don't really care. But he was really trying to cut deep. Because he called me a so-called man of God, which I guess for him, with his international ministry, but his passport with no stamps, was going to be some kind of a check. And then he sent another thing just going on even longer about the same thing. And I read that, and I thought it was funny. And the reason I thought it was funny was because I really think his intention with this was to cut at me. Now, he would say, I'm trying to correct a brother in the Lord, but no, you weren't. He's trying to cut at my confidence, cut at my calling. But I learned a long time ago whose reports I believe, whose word I take as true. See, I've been built for criticism because I have waded in the deep waters of disappointment. I've had family members disappoint me gravely, that the role that they were supposed to play in my life, they just decided they didn't want to play. Some of them even decided they wanted to play it in the lives of my friends and not be it to me. So that's okay. I've had heroes of mine, people I looked up to, people I wanted to be like, turn their back on me and stab me in my back intentionally. I'm well versed in disappointment. I've had people who thought they were going to just be my friend, be with me through thick and thin, and then they never want. Listen, I am well versed in disappointment. And so, Mr. Sir, if you think somehow you saying something about me is going to make me question the call of God on my life, question the work that God, you haven't read Nehemiah, because baby, I'm doing an important work. And I'm too busy right now to come down and fool with you. So be blessed that I didn't have time to reply to you, because all I could have done was check you, and you couldn't have handled that. But the only reason it didn't stick is because I don't say that to myself. There are other things he could have said to me that would have made me get in my feelings. I don't question the call of God on my life. I don't question the purposes and plans he has for my life. I don't question what it is he's trying to do in me and through. I don't question it. But there are some things he could have picked on. There's some things he could have said, and it would have made me feel some kind of way. And I may have gotten real weepy on the inside. And I may have found myself like Gideon in the bottom of a wine press trying to thresh wheat. But not when you say something to me that I don't say to myself. See, you get as somebody when you find that place, that thing, that area, and you say what they say to themselves. See, Gideon's greatest battle that he would ever fight in his life isn't with others on the outside. It's with himself on the inside. Because he looks on the surface nothing like the kind of person that God says he was. God called him a mighty warrior, a mighty man of valor. Yet he's hiding in a wine press, fearfully, uncomfortably doing work. He calls himself the least. He says, my family is the smallest and the weakest. My clan is the worst in our tribe, and I'm the least in my sorry family. Because that's how he sees himself. Hear me today. It is difficult to believe what God says about you when it goes against what you say about you. It is very difficult to believe what it is that God says about you, that God says he's for you, that God says he cares for you, when you don't believe that about yourself. Many people, maybe even you, will never see God do what he could do through you because you won't believe what God says about you. Your perception about who you are limits you from moving by faith. So you say, there's no way I can be generous. You say, there's no way I could ever lead. You say, there's no way I could ever follow God and his purposes for my life. There's no way I could ever be saved. There's no way I could ever make a difference. You say that because you believe that to be true about yourself. Gideon's greatest move by faith was to deny what he said about himself and to believe what God said about him. Can I tell you today, whatever you're telling yourself, by faith, would you start believing what God says about you? You are not a fraud. Some of you, that's the area. That you feel like such a hypocrite. You are not a fraud. You are not being hypocritical in your life. That is not who you are. You're not a bad mom. I know you tell yourself that. It's the reason that you believe that you're not doing a good job with your children. It's the reason you believe that there's no way you'll ever see any more in this life than what you're trying to hold on so tightly. You're not a bad mom. You're not irresponsible. I know you've messed up. I know you dropped the ball. You're not irresponsible. That's not who you are. You are not an addict. I know they tell you you are. I know the meeting you go to tries to remind you that is not who you are. You're not a failure. You've made mistakes. You've blown it a few times. You screwed a few things. You are not a failure. You are not a waste. The world would not be better without you. You got to quit believing the lies of the enemy. Quit accepting that as the perception to which you see who you are. You are his masterpiece, my Bible tells me, created anew in Christ Jesus to do good works that God prepared in advance for you to do. You are mighty and you are strong and you are capable and you are blessed. You are the head and you are not the tail. You are his and he is with you. So today, friend, even if you at the bottom of a wine press, threshing wheat, even if you've been running from responsibility, running from the call of God, running from what it is he's asked you to do, today, by faith, you can push those things down. And even though you're scared, follow him by faith. Let's pray. Father, I thank you today for your word. I pray it continues to move in people's hearts long after these moments. and that you would change, and you would challenge, and you would move us from inferiority to security in you. Move us from speaking death over our lives, doubting whether or not you'll show up, into full faith and confidence that you are who you say you are, and you will do what you've said you will do. We love you. We thank you. Pray all this, Jesus, in your name. And everybody said, amen.